All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm watching the participant list grow to about 40 people, which I think is amazing. There's been lots of events where I wish we had that many people come out. And so, what I really appreciate is so many people want to work on an aspect of their impression and their interactions with the public, which is extremely important. When you talk to our hosts at some of the historic sites, when they poll the public that come to events, a big part of what they rate highly is, they're visiting the reenactor camps and their interactions with reenactors. So if we could put some focus on making that as positive an experience as possible, then I think that's a very strong enhancement to what sites offer and what we do. And then I'm going to share a quick personal story, and then I'll turn this over to Chris. This goes back to 2002, where I went to the Fort Erie event as a member of the public. I had discovered this idea of reenacting, had never been. So I visited with my brother-in-law and my son, who was quite young at the time, and I was quite taken with what I saw. Was probably ready to join a group then and there, but as I walked the camps, as I walked by reenactors, I couldn't find anyone with an interest in talking to me. So, anyways, that all those groups lost. Maybe that was by design. Maybe they knew what they were doing, but they left it to me to do some online research over the winter and ultimately settle on the 41st. So, not only is it enhancing the visitor experience at a site, it's a great opportunity for a group to do some recruiting. And it could be as simple as just having a conversation with a member of the public. So uh, it's very important stuff. I really appreciate everyone with an interest and a passion for doing this. So thank you so much for joining us. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Tom. I'm just going to do a little welcome on my own before I turn it over to our key speakers here. I don't want to repeat anything that Tom says or everything that Tom said, but really appreciate. I was overwhelmed by the number of people that were interested. I thought we might get a handful of people jump on a call, and I think at last count we had over 60 people that had signed up for this. And of course, some people will be watching it online later, but it's just fantastic. I was just overwhelmed, so I really appreciate that. Um, so just quickly, if you're just jumping on, if you missed the beginning, Tom wanted everybody to know this is being recorded. We are going to put it on YouTube later. So if you are not interested in being on that, then just make sure your camera stays off, you stay on mute, um, and then we won't have to worry about that. Um, for those, I know there's the vast majority of the people on here recognize me and knew who I am, but I know that we do have a bit of a reach, and once we get on YouTube, it might spread even further. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Chris Mackay. Currently, my role is I am the infantry commander for Crown Forces North America 1812. So most of you have seen me in that role. I'm going to stop talking in just a few minutes, though. We've got an incredible wealth of knowledge here. We're really blessed in the 1812 community. So, in just a few minutes, I'm going to turn it over to a few experts in this field. First one is Colin Payne. I tried to find pictures of everybody that were kind of doing interpretation here. So, this is Colin has been at Fort. This is a picture, of course, from Fort York. Colin's been amongst many different roles at Fort York. He's been interpreting there for years. So Colin will be one of our speakers. We've also got Jeff Kimber. This is from the World War II event last year. I thought it was an adorable picture, so I had to share it. Again, interpretation. And Jeff is, I should mention, Colin is currently our adjutant for Crown Forces North America, Major Colin Pinn. Jeff Kimber is currently our Sergeant Major for Crown Forces North America, and this is Ewan Wardle. Great shot there as well. Ewan, formerly our Sergeant Major, now retired, and we like to call him Camp Dad. A few couple other quick housekeeping things. We will have lots of time for questions at the end, so if you don't mind saving those for the end. If you don't want to turn your camera on, that's fine. You're welcome to throw them in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on that. But if you do want to, let's just use the raise hand feature when we get there. Um, and then one other thing that I wanted to be abundantly clear on, I'm thrilled that this many people are interested in interpretation at 1812 events, but this is by no means a requirement. If you're not comfortable with this, this is not your bailiwick. You got into reenacting for other reasons. Certainly, nobody's going to force you to do this. Nobody's going to look down on you if that's not your interest, because there are lots of people that are interested in this. So, play to your strengths is, I guess, is that message. Um, Wanted to quickly mention where the idea for this training comes from, and it's actually from a few different sources. When we had applications for Sergeant Major maybe 2 years ago, I had actually more than one person that was applying for the role tell me that they thought this was something that they thought could be improved in our hobby. And actually, Jeff Kimber, the obviously successful candidate, was one of those people. So this is something that a lot of people have brought forward as being really important. And then the other sort of source for this is MTA. So I've been really blessed the last 2 years to be able to go down to Military Through the Ages at Jamestown. They put a huge emphasis on interpretation and really trying to improve groups' interpretation. And last year I was blown away by the sort of things that they did. So a lot of that information, a lot of the information you'll see comes sort of via Jamestown as well as our Southwestern Ontario sites. Um, what is a historical interpreter? I guess I should mention that. We tend to think of ourselves as reenactors. So how does a historical interpreter compare with a reenactor? I found a quote from Amy Tyson, who was writing an article. It was called "Reenacting and Reimagining the Past," and it seemed to really sum it up really nicely. So just quickly read that if that's right. So she says, quote, generally the term reenactors refers to those whose living historical performances are recreational and inwardly focused, whereas the term interpreter denotes those whose more professionalized living history services are primarily intended to engage the public. And yet, distinguishing between a reenactor and an interpreter is a slippery business, given that some reenactors present themselves as historical interpreters and greatly value the pedagogical possibilities of living history. It might be best to think of these terms as describing individuals on an ever-shifting continuum. Pretty much, Amy Tyson sums it up perfectly, my own feelings. We used to think of reenactors, we're doing this just for ourselves, we're focused on the battles and that sort of thing, whereas historical interpreters are professionals, they work at historic sites, maybe they're costume, maybe they're not, but their job is public focused. They're there to present information to the public. I don't think that's true at all. I think in lots of cases, we reenactors do a fantastical job of historical interpretation, and that really is a spectrum that we all move back and forth on depending on the event. So, but hopefully it just gives you kind of an idea of where we're going. So we're trying to lean toward that more public focus with our interpretation rather than just focus on ourselves and our battles. So the last one before I turn it over to sort of the experts in this field, I just wanted to address we're just here for the battle. So Tom already brought this up a little bit, but we know that there are members of the public that will come to us and say, I'm not interested in what you're eating today, I'm just here for the battle. But similarly, there are also reenactors who will say the same thing, and some of them will drive up to a reenactment 10 minutes before the battle, hop out of their car fully dressed, and go, this is just what I'm here for. Um, I want to again reiterate that's perfectly fine. We're not saying that everybody has to be here for everything. If a member of the public wants to say, I'm not interested in anything beyond that, okay, we can't force them into that. But on the other hand, like Tom mentioned, there are a ton of people that are looking for more than that. They're trying to get more out of the reenactment, and that's the public and the reenactors themselves. And we need to make sure that we're not kind of letting them down. So hopefully today we'll give you lots of ideas um, of things that we can do between the battles. In other words, so we're not just pulling people out just for the battles. There's tons of opportunities for interpretation in those what we've often thought of as downtimes. And so that's hopefully what we'll give you some ideas of today. So what we're gonna the flow for the rest of the time, as I say, questions will come at the end. We're going to sort of rotate through our speakers here. I'm just going to ask them to unmute as they get to their section. But on this slide, we've got some basics, and then the next slide, we're continuing with some basics. Why is interpretation important? I'm going to turn that over to Colin. He's up first. Thanks, Colin.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so why interpretation is important. I mean, this is something that's going to be kind of talked about and touched about throughout the presentation here. And kind of touching upon some of the things that Tom and Chris has already said. Even though obviously not everyone in the hobby is necessarily keen on interpretation, doesn't have the skills. I mean, as a whole, as a hobby, what we're all into, interpretation is part of the hobby. And we think increasingly, it's part of our agreement, first and foremost, with our host sites. It's part of our job to help them present the history, present the event, present the site in a good light. And a large part of that is part of engaging with the public and making sure that they're giving them a good experience. As Chris said, there's often a bit of a blurred line between the idea of reenactors, historical interpreters, living history, and even public history. And as we said, those are not, hard and fast definitions. There's often, a lot of overlap. And I think increasingly so, there's a heightened emphasis on wanting to prioritize living history and interpretation. And sometimes, as we know, reenacting as a whole can sometimes have a lot of assumptions put about it. So having a strong focus on interpretation, on talking to the public, and making sure they have a good experience is important, I think, to the longevity of the hobby we all enjoy. It enhances the public experience first and foremost. It can help strengthen the relationship between the historic sites, the public, the living history community, reenacting community, and the public as a whole. And we've seen just the power over the last couple of years of that the public support for some of these events, some of these sites have been able to quite literally save some of these events from almost being canceled. So it's important to maintain those good relationships and those good experiences in the member of the public, because they are ultimately the ones that are the ones that keep supporting these sites, keep supporting the events, and really then gives us the sites to partake in the hobby that we all love so much. And it's good to sort of present, good messages and impress the public to hope to educate and interpret and present history in an engaging way. And make sure to sort of spell some of maybe the assumptions at face value that, oh, maybe we're just here to, shoot guns and play soldiers, that there's a lot more nuance, there's a lot more depth of knowledge here. And it prioritizes and making sure that we have time to talk to people and give them the nuances and the complexities of history that makes it so fascinating. For myself, I think it's contagious. People appreciate that. And also, it's also important because it helps people, as Tom sort of said in the story at the beginning, it helps people also sort of interpret the hobby as a whole and explain to people kind of what the hobby is. Because the hobby can seem very interesting, but it also, let's be serious, on face value, it can seem a little bit odd, a bit perplexing as to why people dress up in wool and come and do this. And having, yes, people will go and they'll watch a battle, they'll watch a demonstration, but having that interpretation to the public helps to sort of bridge the gap between what they're seeing and the realities that we are just people who've gotten this hobby and that maybe you too might be interested in it. So ultimately, it also helps with recruitment and it helps with the longevity of the hobby and the success of these sites. And I think most importantly, and this is something that myself and you and others who have worked professionally in the field over the last few years have noticed, is that, as we all know, we're living in an increasingly heightened and sort of politically charged world. We're seeing history is coming up, and it's manipulated and it's contorted, it's misunderstood for various reasons and agendas. And in a world of smartphones and social media and stuff, it's important that we present ourselves in the hobby and the sites and history in good light. And we don't necessarily want to perpetuate stereotypes or assumptions. So taking the time to talk to a member of the public can really be the difference between, a bad article or bad press or bad publicity. It can sometimes be the importance between the public image of these events and potential controversy, depending on what is said or is not said and people's impression of us. Because it's not always clear, those of us who are camping in a field versus the site staff of Fort Erie, Fort George, what the distinction is. Sometimes, they all just think we're all site staff, or they think that everyone's just reenactors. So it's important to make sure that we are representing the sites that we're often volunteering as. And as Chris said, obviously, reinterpretation, talk to the public is not for everyone. It doesn't have to be done for everyone, but as a whole, for a hobby, it is very important for I think for the longevity, for the success of the hobby going into the future, and for the continued great partnership that we have between our host sites and the members of the public as a whole. So,
Thanks, Colin. You and you're up.
Yeah. So when engaging with visitors, reenactors should aim to create a genuine connection rather than deliver a performance. The most effective interpretation, more like a dialogue than a presentation. Strong interpretation isn't about reciting a perfect script, which I'm trying to do right now. It's about fostering meaningful exchange. Ask questions, invite curiosity, and adapt your approach to each audience. Visitors are far more likely to remember how you made them feel, welcomed, interested, and involved, than the exact details you share. And when talking about the basics, it's sort of we're talking about first impressions. If you want that sort of engaging, meaningful dialogue with our guests, it's important that they feel welcomed and comfortable when in your camp. So the way we present ourselves, the way we present our camp, does a lot to invite visitors to come and engage with us. So if everyone's just gathered around the fire and really just focused in on the core group and not paying attention to anyone walking by, then chances are no one walking by is going to engage with you because you look like you're busy, look like you're just chatting with your friends. They don't want to engage. But if your goal is to help bring our audiences to us and to engage with them, the more you can do to be forward facing, to maybe assign people, to just say simply hello as people come by. An act of friendly greeting may entice people to come into your camp and actually engage with you. So when thinking of the basics, think of that first impression. If you want people to engage with you, you need to present a warm and engaging face and a welcoming place for people to come and start that dialogue.
Thanks, Ewan. Jeff?
Okay, so greeting visitors. This might seem like the most simplistic answer you can possibly give, but the reality is, and going back to Tom's example of him walking through the camp and no one engaging, just saying hi to people can make a tremendous difference to how comfortable that person will then feel to ask follow-up questions, wander through the camp, and feel like they're in a comfortable environment. And when I say greeting visitors, it is just simply a hello, how are you doing? Or also follow the vibe. Like, I mean, we've all been in that scenario where you're in full kit and a little kid throws up a hand salute. Well, throw the hand salute back up for that little kid. It creates those kinds of little moments, and especially if you're engaging with the kid, the parent will be appreciative, and now all of a sudden you've got this whole family worth of people who now feel like, oh, these are cool people who I can interact with. And especially the way that a lot of reenactments, the camp layouts are, people will arrive, like say at Fort Erie at like the Welcome Center, and they stroll through the merchants and then they end up in the camp. Well, if you happen to be the reenactor who's in full kit wandering through the merchants and you just catch that eye contact with that family, just say hello, how are you? Engage in small talk. It doesn't need to always jump into, okay, so the lace pattern on my uniform. It's just the small little human things that, like, we're all people living in the 21st century. Like, and those types of interactions before you even get into the history element of it will break down that walls and create sort of a sense of comfort where people feel like, okay, this is a cool place and these are cool people. So that's basically it. Say hello to people. When you see them wandering around the camp, say hello to them. How are you? Are you from around the area? Stuff like that will open the door way more than even like, the cool uniforms and whatnot. Okay.
Thanks, Jeff. So Colin's going to turn to What If I'm Uncomfortable, which is where I started. So I wish Colin was around as a resource 25 years ago.
Do you have an
Thanks, Colin.
anecdote? Do you have an anecdote to share, Chris?
No, I just most of you know me as an introvert. So saying hello to a stranger in the merchants is not my thing. So off you go, Colin.
Well, that's a good segue. So, I mean, yeah, as we know, many of us are introverts, and what if I'm uncomfortable? It's okay to be uncomfortable. It's okay to be nervous. Even the best of us, most some of the best historical interpreters that I've met, they all started somewhere. They all started with that first awkward tour, that first awkward, Musk interpretation. Everyone has to start somewhere, and so just start small, start simple. As Jeff and Ewan say, just start with a simple greeting. It doesn't have to immediately go into a massive conversation about the nuances of, flintlock musket technology. Just talk to people, just be engaged. It doesn't have to be anything history related. It's just talking to them, acknowledging their presence and welcoming them to the camp. And if you're nervous, then don't try and do it by yourself from the get-go. Try, and if there's someone who's else is in your group who is more experienced talking to the public, or just a more experienced reenactor, then take them, do a bit of a buddy system, take them on as a bit of a mentor and kind of help them out. So if you have someone in your group who really likes talking to members of the public about uniforms, about what they're cooking, or about muskets, then hang out with them and say, "Hey, I'd like to sort of get present, help. I'd like to help you out," and maybe be their assistant to sort of help show them the musket, or show them, and sort of almost be a bit of a flugelman, as we would call it, but for what they're talking about. Start small and build into it. It's okay to be nervous. We've all start somewhere, and generally, as Tom's indicated, if someone's approaching you or asking you a question, there's a good chance a member of the public might be a little nervous too. So try and just ease the tension, be casual, be welcoming. A lot of us get nervous, a lot of us are introverted, but most of us who are working professionals now, we all have had to go into meetings and talk to random people we haven't met before, and so just try and channel that. It doesn't take long to sort of bring down the awkwardness. But just be calm, be casual. Don't think you have to remember everything. From my experience, it is more memorable from the public experience to be enthusiastic, to be nice, to be keen and positive what you're saying, than to present it in a perfectly, articulate script sort of style. Just be yourself. And usually that's pretty contagious, and people will pick up on that and will have a more enjoyable, more memorable experience of a quick conversation with someone who's really keen about the history than a 20-minute long dialogue that is like a doctoral thesis that is in one ear and out the other. So just be yourself, and try not to be too rigid. But also it comes with practice, it comes with time, basically. And that kind of leads, I guess, into Ewan's section.
Yeah, thanks, Colin. Nice segue. But I do like the idea of thinking of the public as bears, where they're more scared of you than they are than we are of the. Thanks, Colin. Ewan?
Yeah, as Colin was saying, be natural and be adaptable. When speaking with visitors, start by being yourself. Use your normal voice, speak conversationally, rather than performing or reciting a script. Visitors respond best when they feel they are interacting with a real person, not listening to someone or something that's just rehearsed, right? Instead of memorizing lines, work with a few key ideas you can shape to fit the moment. Every audience is different. Family with young children, casual visitor who didn't expect to see a reenactment, but here they are, or a history enthusiast, and we've met many of those. You'll be engaging each of them their own way. Stay flexible and adjust your approach as needed. And also pay attention to cues like body language, types of questions they're asking, the energy level. If visitors seem curious, you can go deeper. If they seem unsure or distracted, simplify or shift your approach. Good interpretation is responsive. It changes with the people in front of you.
Thanks, Ewan. So this slide is called Basics Continued, but it's getting as Ewan was doing there, getting a little bit deeper into the now that we've sort of greeted people and now we started that conversation. How do we how do we dig a little deeper? How do we make that connection a little bit? So Jeff, you're up for the danger of this is probably one of mine that I've used 100 times, right? Hi, welcome to the British Army camp. Do you have any questions? So Jeff's going to tell us what's wrong with me saying that.
Okay, so the danger of do you have any questions? So for me, I mean, we all experience this every day. Anytime you go to a clothing store, a car dealership, or a furniture store, you always have a salesperson who comes up and like, "Oh, do you need help with anything?" And then generally, you're like, "No, I'm just looking around. I'm not here to buy a car. I just want to check things out." So I think for me is when we jump into sort of the trap of, "Hey, how are you? Do you have any questions?" You're already sort of engaging with a pre-programmed thing that human beings in the modern era deal with all the time, and they kind of don't want anything to do with it. And also, too, we have to remember, especially for people who aren't big history nerds like us, they might have questions, but they don't know what those questions are yet. Like they're seeing people in crazy uniforms, crazy costumes in these tents, and they don't even know where to start. So this is where it goes back to sort of what we've been saying about, especially with you and that conversation. If you get into a normal conversation with a person, hey, how are you? Oh, I'm good. And then, oh, you're from around the area? Oh, yeah. And then once you've gotten that sort of second step into a normal conversation, and now that person feels comfortable, maybe that's when you're more likely to get the, oh, well, why are you guys wearing red? Is it to hide the blood? Like a lot of those common questions because a lot of people don't know where to start. So it's up for us when you're doing the interpretation is to create that comfortable, welcoming environment where a person feels comfortable in an interaction before you can sort of take it to that next level about the history. And sometimes too, you've got to take a little bit of a first step. So you've had a nice little conversation. And something that I would oftentimes do, because one of the most common questions are, oh, are you hot in that? I like to throw it around. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm doing all right. Are you hot in that? And then it creates a stupid little fort joke. But then it sort of breaks down the walls a little bit, and then you can get into, well, believe it or not, people back then like this even though it's a uniform, but like people wore head to toe clothes throughout the summer. It wasn't a short and t-shirt era. You can sort of whatever avenue you can sort of find, you can then segue into that portion of the history. And again, with what Ewan was saying, is always you got to gauge that person's interest. If they seem very keen or they want to know more, then go to that next level. But sometimes people just want to know, are you hot in that uniform? And even that interaction, you have that small little conversation, they ask you that, say, yeah, I'm super hot in this uniform right now. And that's all that they're sort of looking for. But the idea is try to avoid asking, do you have any questions? Much more, try to just have a normal conversation with the person, make them feel comfortable. And generally, once you have that comfort level, that's when the questions will, from my own experience working in the Fort World and reenacting, that's when you get that next level where now people feel comfortable asking their questions. Because also, too, you have to realize people also don't want to sound stupid, and if they don't understand exactly what's going on, and it's hard for them to jump right into it. And then also too, it reminds me, so I have little kids, and when they were really young they'd ask why all the time. And one of the questions that you get, oh, is that a real fire? And yes, it's a real fire, but sometimes it's not that they want to know, is that a real fire? The real thing is like, why are they having a fire? Like most people think of a campfire as like something you do in the evening, roasting marshmallows. Well, why do you have a fire on the hottest day of the year here? And say, yeah, that's a real fire. British soldiers are responsible for cooking all their own food, and then you can jump into a little bit of the history of it, and then it kind of like you're testing the waters a bit. You give them a bit of information and see how they take it, and then move on from there. Anyways, that's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Jeff. I know we've all joined in on the Facebook kind of pile on where here's all the stupid questions I've got. Is that a real baby or is that right? And but really, we're really trying to push beyond that and go, look, they're not at, they know that's a real baby. They can tell, but they're asking something deeper and they don't know how to word it, right? So that's really, part of what we're doing here. So thanks, Jeff. Colin, you're up with how to avoid smothering people with facts. Again, these are, by the way, this is not supposed to be picky on anyone. If anybody, it's picking on me, because these are all things that I personally have done in the last 25 years. So most of these come from my own lack of attempt at interpretation. But thanks, Colin.
Uh, welcome. So avoiding putting people with facts. So as you and Jeff sort of said, keep it personal, keep it casual, keep it very conversation. Remember, this whole hobby, the whole living history, it's a type of experimental archaeology that visitors can engage with. And while our conversation, it's about the history, but it's about trying to draw those parallels between our lives today, the people's lives and experiences back then, and helping people, the public today, realize and empathize with the experiences of people back then through the actions and what we're experiencing today. So ultimately, we should be, aiming to provoke curiosity with people in our questions rather than just simply providing them, a lecture or regurgitating a bunch of facts. Talk about your own experiences. Yeah, instead of talking about, you know, I always tell like don't just try and regurgitate something that people could read on a Wikipedia page or that is devoid of what people are seeing or experiencing in the moment. Talk about what you're doing. Talk about the actions. So rather than talk about as Jeff said, talk about the experiences of what it is like to wear the uniforms, what it's like to cook the food, or the sensories experiences. Don't just repeat stuff that they could read anywhere. Filter information to sort of avoid to sort of information for the core message. Don't just deliver every fact. I mean, there was a colleague of mine years ago who was very knowledgeable, but they would try to regurgitate members of the public on the various muzzle velocities of every different size type of artillery piece in the War of 1812 and things that just really didn't matter, but because they knew the information, they thought the public had to know this information. And realistically, it's more important about the connection, prioritizing that personal connection. That's one of the things that makes this hobby and living history so unique compared to, say, just a museum exhibit or something sort of static. So really avoid lectures, make it more personable, and engage in prompts. And as we've already said, try to avoid the "Do you have any questions?" Try to make it about try to fuel the conversation about people's own experiences, and don't go into an interpretation or a conversation with sort of preconceived notion of what you think these people are going to want to ask questions about or what they're curious about. Let them sort of steer the conversation, and take your time and check that they sort of understand or that they're satisfied with your answer before you then move on to a new conversation or before you end the conversation potentially. So.
Yeah, thanks, Colin. Nice segue to Ewan's here. This is a little bit of a teaching thing I've thrown in here, right? How do you check for understanding, which is, what we spend most of our time doing when we're teaching, but it's a little bit different of a vibe here. Ewan?
Yeah, kind of picking up where Colin dropped off there. Take your time when speaking with visitors, and kind of tie in what Jeff was saying. They are often processing new information, unfamiliar objects, and often a very different historical context all at once. There's a sensory overload happening. So slow down, pause between ideas, and avoid trying to explain everything all at once. It often helps to break information into small, clear parts. What something is, how it was used, and why it mattered. Simple, relatable comparisons can also make unfamiliar details easier to understand and remember. So a couple examples that I'm going to give. One is a colleague of mine, when talking about the musket, would obviously talk about the muzzle of the barrel. And to relate that to children, she would basically bring up what is the muzzle of, where have you maybe heard the term muzzle when referencing a dog, right? And getting the kids to think of what is a muzzle of a dog, it's their mouth. So the muzzle of a barrel, it's the mouth of the barrel. Another example from another colleague I've worked with when trying to get children to understand volley fire. He used the example of throwing a shoe. Like if I was to throw a shoe at you, you could probably get out of the way, right? And kids yeah, of course. But if all of us here were to all throw our shoes at you, are you going to get out of the way? And I thought that was a very effective way of getting the kids to understand a subject that is maybe beyond their ability to perceive it in the moment. And this ties in with checking for understanding as you go. Ask brief questions, not do you have any questions, but watch for nods or puzzled expressions and adjust your pace or explanation when needed. And doing sort of check-in questions is a great way of doing that. Good interpretation, above all, it's not rushed. It gives visitors time to make connections and feel included in the conversation.
Thanks, Ewan. Sorry, forgot to unmute there for a second. Now we're going to our next slide is a little bit beyond the basics. So all three of our experts here have already sort of touched on this visitors' feelings and sort of personal connection, that sort of thing. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that. But before we get there, Jeff, is going to take us through know your stuff a little bit.
Okay, so know your stuff. So when you see that, immediately it's like, okay, so I need to be an expert in the War of 1812 and the Napoleonic Wars in general before I start talking to a person. And that's incorrect. When we say know your stuff, it means talk about what you know. So if you're an expert in certain things, you know everything about cooking in the War of 1812, but have no idea even how a cannon works, then maybe don't talk about how that canon works. Stick to your strengths, stick to what you know, and that way you can remain confident in it, and you don't want to end up in the trap where you feel you need to know everything. And it is okay to say, "Oh, I don't know." Like for me, like one of my personal examples when I was working at Fort Erie, I had a visitor who asked me, "Oh, well, what's the difference between War of 1812 tactics versus like what was going on in the American Civil War?" And I'm not an American Civil War expert, so I couldn't really answer, like I couldn't do a comparison sort of on the fly. So what I did say is actually a great question. I'm not 100% sure how things evolved to the American Civil War, but then I leaned into my own strength. But what I do know is it was linear warfare and talk a little bit about the War of 1812. So if that person is a big Civil War buff, then maybe they can make that own comparison themselves. And then also too, when we're doing these reenactments, what I always do before any reenactment, I always refresh myself as to the history of the site that we're going to be, or the battle or whatnot. Like, especially you go to a place like, say, Stony Creek, that you're in the middle of the suburbs. There's busy roads going around all over the place. So members of the public are coming here. They know there was a battle, but sometimes it's hard to contextualize what this place was, why it was important before modern society sort of evolved around this battlefield. So I always try to just read a little bit about the battle so that way I have the context fresh in my memory so that way I can talk to the members of the public if people ask, "Well, what happened here? Why was there a battle here?" And you don't need to get into all the details and the nuances, just like, "Oh, well, this is like the 1813 campaign. The Americans landed at Fort George." Just the brief basic things to be comfortable in that scenario, answering what are some of the more common questions. Same thing too with like, why did they wear red? Why did they all line up and shoot at one another? I even still now, I've been doing this for a while. I like to refresh those basic things by reading up before I go to these types of events. So that way it's fresh in my mind. And more specifically, I can speak to it at different levels. You get a big, huge history person, I can get into the detailed nuances of like, deploying from column into line and your light infantry being out in front screening your troops, or I can just give the very basic thing. Well, because a musket's inaccurate, the only way you can hit anything is if you all fire at the same time, going back to the UN shoe analogy. So don't be afraid to say I don't know. And then also too, if you don't know, somebody asks me that question about artillery, I don't know anything about it. Well, maybe walk over to the artillery camp with them and say, well, if you're really interested in it, here's somebody who knows a lot about it, and sort of pass it off. This is something that we would do when we worked at Fort Erie, is certain people have strengths and weaknesses. We all have our own niche areas of interest. And if I know that Ewan knows a lot about something that I'm not 100% familiar and I see him kicking around, maybe walk over and say, "Hey, when these people had some questions about, such and such, maybe you could help them answer." And that's sort of the thing. So know the people around you, do your own little research, but again, speak to your strengths, and there's no problem at all saying, "Oh, I don't really know." That's the reality. We're never going to know everything there is to know about the Napoleonic Wars or the War of 1812. It's just not possible. So don't be afraid, sorry, to say that. Okay.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, at MTA last weekend, I found myself doing that all the time. It's like, oh, well, tell me about the women's experience. Well, let me introduce you to Thea. Or I should have been prepared, but every third visitor wanted to talk about the American Revolution rather than the Napoleonic Wars. So let me introduce you to, Ian or Brian or muskets. Let me introduce you, right? Everybody in that group had a strength that it's like amazing. I'm just kind of the central processing here. I'm just gonna feed you off to all these other people who are way more knowledgeable than I am. So thanks, Jeff. So Colin's going to turn to how can you make this a personal experience, which is kind of that digging deeper that we were talking about.
Uh, Thanks, Chris. And I mean, with that, there's no one way to do this. It's going to be completely dependent on every visitor you're dealing with, every conversation topic. But basically, the biggest thing is about making it relatable to them. A lot of times, history, as we know, can seem way far back and really disconnected from the lives we live in today. But really, uh, most people I've engaged with, whether it's from reenacting or from a professional side career, they do understand that history is complicated. The history has a lot of context and nuance, and that people, just like today, people back then are very much, not all good or all bad, and that the experience that people lived, um, uh, need to be, are need to be rationalized on a personal level. And that's one of the things that reenacting is really important is using the sensory experiences, the sights, the sounds, the smells, the feels, to help relate a lot of this history. And so, as we know, some of the sites we do these don't even have massive historical interpreter staff on the best of days. So a lot of times we have people coming to these sites who this is their first experience, not only coming to the site, but coming to the site when it's activated and animated to the level that it is. So one of the things that reenacting is really important is sort of taking away, yes, the macro side of history, the big history, but really bring it down to the personal level and looking more at the micro level, talking about, um, you know, talking about the feeling of the uniform, whether it's just the scratchiness of wool on the skin, or what it's like to wear them, or the smells of campfire or black powder smoke. Letting people have experiences, whether it's even just popping into an officer's tent and sort of seeing how they live back then, or taking a look at what you're cooking over the fire, or watching someone clean a musket. It's about that micro sort of personal level. Letting them, oh, what's it like to carry all the kit? Well, here's a pack you can try on, or just those little experiences help people relate to the experience of people back then, help them to empathize with people back then. At the fort, a lot of times we're take a group of school kids into our soldiers barracks, and the first thing they sort of talk about is, oh, it reminds me of being in summer camp, because they emphasize back to what it was like to living, say, sleeping in a camp cabin, or we compare the amount of space that 32 soldiers were into. A lot of our visitors are people local in Toronto. It's like, how does this compare to the amount of space you have in your condo? And people kind of help to rationalize it that way. Or as people have talked about, understanding the idea of weaponry and rifling versus smoothbore. As we all know, there's the analogy of with sports between throwing a basketball or a football. A lot of time, now talking about military music and talking about the different tunes, and people, well, why were they playing music all the time? It's like, well, when you're taking a long commute on the subway or something, what do you do to pass the time to take away the monotony of traveling a long distance? You have earbuds in, you're listening to music. So it's the same sort of idea, trying to bridge the gap between why people thought and did the things they did back then and the experiences they have. With the experiences we have today to help people to better connect with the personal level, the personal experience, which is where reenacting and living history is so important.
Thanks, Colin. And really related on this sort of this idea of making a connection with your visitors and really helping them understand can we connect with their feelings, not just a personal experience, but can we connect with a visitor's feelings? Ewan.
Yeah, so this really carries on from what Colin was just saying about making it human and meaningful. Good interpretation connects with visitors on a human level. History often carries emotional weight, and it's important to make space for that. If a story is powerful or difficult or surprising, it's okay to acknowledge that and let visitors sit with it. Use stories to bring the past to life. So one of the things I like to use as resources to help with my interpretation is soldiers' memoirs, surviving accounts of lived experiences from back then. That way, guests, rather than listening to facts, I'm describing real experiences, long hours of manual labor, the effort of carrying equipment, the skill required to build by hand, or the uncertainty families faced in times of war. These details help visitors see people in the past as real and relatable. Uh, uh, Invite visitors into the conversation by asking open-ended questions and encouraging reflection when you're taking this approach. Listen to their responses and acknowledge it, what they share. When visitors feel heard and emotionally connected, the experience becomes more meaningful and memorable. Kind of what Colin was saying when speaking about the barracks room, I will often get casual visitors or school groups. People will start to relate with their own experiences. So Colin brought up, oh, this reminds me of summer camp, and it's important to let that get out. Let people feel that they can express themselves and share their own experiences and how it relates to this space, and then that can reinforce the conversation and again make the overall experience more memorable.
Thanks, Ewan. And something that when we sort of did the pre-meeting here, we didn't really focus on, but um, I appreciate you bringing up. It doesn't just have to be positive feelings, right? So lots of times as reenactors, we want to if we are trying to make our visitors feel something, it's maybe pride in something, or maybe even just interest. But if they're feeling uncomfortable or they're feeling angry even, that's okay too, right? And accepting and acknowledging those feelings and really allowing those visitors to connect with those feelings too, is really important. So thank you for bringing that up too. And then sort of a very different way to connect with visitors, especially kids, but adults as well, right? Is getting them involved. So Jeff, that one's for you.
Okay, so for me, getting them involved is kind of like another layer down. So we've already gone through grading them, how to make people feel comfortable engaging in those conversations. Now you've got that kind of connection with the member of the public, and it's like how do you take that to the next level? Because human beings are tactile. We like to have a sense of what things felt like. How they lived, and that real touching and feeling part of it is part of the human experience. One of the things that I used to do a lot in World War One, is I'd bring a period World War One soccer ball. And if I saw a kid wearing a soccer jersey, I would go grab my soccer ball, go up to the kid and be like, "Oh, you like soccer?" I'm like, "Oh, yeah." I'm like, "Well, check this thing out." And then let the kid kick the ball. I kick the ball back and forth. You talk a little bit about soccer. You talk a little bit about how that was a popular sport back in the World War One, and so on and so forth. And I know that like War of 1812, it's often hot. We're not playing sports per se, but the same sort of thing is true. And there's already been some conversations about letting a kid or even an adult let somebody try on a uniform. The picture of Ewan at the beginning of this is him with a bunch of kids, and the kid is holding the weight of the musket. Of course, we're not giving our weapons to members of the public, but just that sense of like, okay, so they would march all day, every day in some situations, and you're carrying your pack. So here, try on a pack. Here's the weight of a musket, and all of a sudden, it's now that person is transported into what we all do, understanding like, okay, this is what it feels like to have this stuff on. And it might seem very basic, but having a kid sit down in your camp chair, you're in there in the camp. Why don't you try? This is what our chairs are like these small little things. If you're doing some cooking, offer a member of the public, okay, well, here's a little ramekin filled with our stew. Why don't you try that? This is like a very standard soldier stew. Those types of things will reinforce the memory, especially for young people. And for those of you who don't know, the first reenactment I ever went to, I was 11 years old. I went to the Fort Erie reenactment. I saw that. And there was a group of American reenactors. I have no idea who they are. They let us try their stew, and that stuck in my mind big time. It felt like, oh, it's cool. Like I'm part of this crew. And now here I am in my mid 40s, and I'm still doing this crazy hobby. So those types of small interactions where they can be involved in any kind of way, touching things, feeling things. If you're playing a card game, let them try the card, see what it's like. at Fort Erie when I worked there, for some reason we got a bunch of reproduction shillings, and I'm like, we're gonna start gambling in front of the public. Like the soldiers are gonna be around the corner, and we would gamble like we had period dice and we were doing dice games. As soon as kids or members of the public came through, we'd immediately get them involved. Hey, why don't you come over and let them throw a few hands, and then you give them one of these fake shillings at the end. And all of a sudden, they're now having a brief snippet of like an activity that soldiers did all the time in their spare time, and it brings them that little step closer. And a lot of historical forts will often have like cookies in the kitchen, stuff like that. And those types of interactions can really ram an experience home and make it something that becomes more memorable for people. And going back to what Tom said, you get cool people who let you try on a coat. Maybe you think, well, this is something I want to give a shot myself.
Thanks, Jeff. I don't know if many people know this, but when I was about 11 or 12 years old, I visited Fort Erie, and one of their interpretive staff was portraying a surgeon. And at 12 years old, he had a couple of kids hold me down and he sawed my leg off. And I was hooked, right? I never looked back, right? So people ask, how did you get started? It was right there. It was that guy getting me involved. So, Ewan, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, because we're going to go on to another part of the presentation in a second. I just want to kind of reiterate some of the things that we're bringing up, if you don't mind. Which again, to tie in with everything we've been saying, is treat interpretation as a two-way exchange. Listening is just as important as speaking. Visitors will bring their own questions, experiences, perspectives, and those moments often lead to the most meaningful interactions. And be ready to follow their lead. A child might be curious about what soldiers ate. A parent may ask about daily life. Another visitor might respond to themes of hardship or injustice. Rather than stealing back to a set plan, respond to what they're generally interested in. So, this is stuff that Jeff has touched on. This is stuff I've touched on, Colin has touched on, and I just feel it's important to bring up this idea of listening. When visitors feel heard and their curiosity shapes the conversation, they become more engaged. Those are the moments they remember when the experience felt personal, relevant, and connected to them.
Thank you so much, Ewan. Yeah, we are just about to move on, but it's a really good point, a nice summary of kind of what we covered in the basics and then a little bit beyond the basics as well. But what we are going to move on to now, I originally had this titled as Problem Children, but let's maybe a little bit more politely call it common problems, especially looking at the topic that's coming up for you in a minute. So the first one, most of these are arranged a little bit as a question. So for Colin, how do you correct a member of the public? And we all know this comes up all the time. It could be the most basic fact, or it could be a complete misunderstanding of the entire situation they found themselves in, but they are confident in their knowledge. What do we do about that, Colin?
Well, like a lot of things, there's no one answer. It kind of depends on uh, what the people are saying that is potentially incorrect or not completely factually right. But ultimately, we should try to provoke curiosity and build connection with visitors rather than just providing them a lecture. And so, treat visitors with dignity and courtesy, even if they are, don't try to avoid make assumptions on their level of historical knowledge or their interest. And be tactful and sensitive when responding to visitor's statement or question, and don't be dismissive, even if they say the wrong thing. A lot of times, if people do say something that is a common myth or factually incorrect, a lot of times we know where they have heard this from. We know that this is a common misperception, whether it's the thing about, people's height. It's because they look at a lot of doors. They look at beds being made the way they are. Or, the myths about the redcoats with hiding blood. I mean, just the other night I was watching The Pit. If anyone's watching the Pit show, they just made another thing about the triangular bayonets and the three-sided wounds. So a lot of times these common things that people say, we know why they're thinking this. We know where they're getting this from. It's not that they are deliberately, trying to reading the wrong material. It's just that's one of the things we're here for, is to try and course correct a little bit, as you will. So don't just be dismissive. Don't just say that's wrong. Just say like, well, that's actually interesting you say that, but actually we often hear that, but and then try and segue into correcting or layering on to that assumption as to what they said isn't completely accurate, or maybe was accurate for research or understanding 10, 20, 30 years ago, but history also, research has changed. And one of the things that we do as a hobby is experimental archaeology. So we can say it firsthand. We can say that we know that actually having bled on a red coat, blood does actually not dry this shade. So you can talk about your own experiences as a way to sort of back it up. And a lot of times people will understand that and internalize that a lot more than feeling like you're just correcting them because, for the sake of it. Um, Ultimately recognize that there may be several different and conflicting viewpoints on a several subjects, especially as there are subjects that are weighted and changing and have a lot of emotion behind it, and that's okay. Don't be combative. Sometimes if people are stuck in their opinions, it's best to just try and de-escalate and either change the conversation or try to wrap it up. Sometimes people won't be convinced, and that's okay too. Again, there's no one way to correct a member of the public, but the biggest thing about being understanding, empathetic, don't judge, don't make assumptions. Understand that most of the things we hear that are not correct public, we know why they think that, we know where they're getting that from, and really allow them to draw their own conclusions, but also don't try to force a sort of judgment upon them. We're here to help steer the conversation, but to not just be constant fact checkers. Myth busting is fun. But sometimes we also want people to walk away with a positive experience and not feel like they were going in a conversation where people were just shooting down everything they knew. So it's a bit of a careful tact and balancing act.
Yeah, thanks, Colin. And as you're talking, I'm realizing this is a massive question and could have had an hour on itself, right? And you are talking about there's very different, if somebody's talking about the triangular bayonet making triangular wounds, that's a very different than somebody's conclusion about the British Army and how they're sort of an evil empire, right? Right? We could have very different levels of trying to correct or even persuade or open a different perspective, right? So this was a massive question, but really appreciate you doing your best there to to sort of answer it all at once. Maybe I should have started with this one a little bit easier, perhaps. Ewan, how do you correct a fellow reenactor who's telling somebody that the bayonet makes triangular shaped wounds?
Well, honestly, Chris, I was a little surprised that I was given this topic. I don't have any experience whatsoever in doing this on a reenactment basis. No experience. Anyway, the main thing is we're here to support each other, and we got to treat things professionally, even though this is a hobby. If you're correcting a fellow reenactor, approach it with respect and care. If possible, if the person was saying something in public in front of visitors, if possible, step aside and speak privately rather than trying to address the issue in front of people. This helps maintain trust and keeps the focus on the visitor experience. So you hear somebody doing interpretation that you disagree with, don't interrupt. Let them do their bit and then have a conversation afterwards with them. And keep the conversation focused on the content, not the person. Frame your input around accuracy and, above all, a shared learning rather than criticism. For example, you might say, I think, that detail may come from a slightly later period. You want to double check that together? At the end of the day, kind of what Colin was saying about the general public, we may know potential sources where our fellow hobbyists are getting information from. And so that's an important thing that we got to keep in mind when we're engaging in conversation with them is finding out where they're getting that information or who did they hear it from, and where did you get your information from, and who did you hear that from, and through that dialogue, a greater truth could be reached. The big thing is to aim to be collaborative rather than authoritative, right? Present your perspective as part of a shared goal of getting it right. I might be mistaken, but I've read it was done this way. What do you think? This approach encourages an open discussion and supports a positive team dynamic. We're all on the same team. ultimately, and we're all here to help inform our audiences, right? So don't make it about you. Don't make it about them. Make it about the ultimate goal of sharing accurate information.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like that approach, Ewan, because especially um, I know for a fact that I've tried to have that conversation, have that dialogue with somebody, and it turned out I was the one in the wrong, or I was even misinterpreting what they were saying, right? So, I'm trying to correct them on something, maybe a bigger issue, and they're saying, "Well, that's not what I was saying at all. This is my perspective." And you go, "Oh, actually, that makes a lot more sense, right?" But if you're just going in and saying, "No, look, you're wrong. I know everything. I'm the," you haven't got that dialogue, and you're gonna lose that chance for collaboration right away. Jeff, you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I think you were touching on it too. So there is the how to correct a fellow reenactor, but then we also have to be cognizant also that like I might not know everything, or I might have an old bit of information, or I might have heard something, hadn't looked into myself. And also sometimes working in the fort world, you end up with fortisms, things that people have said at forts for many, many years, but then when you do a little bit more digging, like, oh shoot, we somebody had got that wrong ages ago, and it's just been passed down through the generations. So it's important for us to, even if you're even like the most knowledgeable amongst us, like it's impossible to know everything that's happened, and it's important to try to keep an open mind and realize that like you might be wrong. And if you ever hear me saying something to a member of the public and you know that, oh, Jeff's right out to lunch, you have to be open to hearing that criticism yourself, or that correction, or be like, oh, sorry, Jeff, like that, you're totally out to lunch there. They weren't using M1 Abrams tanks in the Battle of Stony Creek, for example. So just keep an open mind and allow and be willing to hear that correction for yourself as well.
And once again, there's actually a member of the Crown Forces staff that assumed that this next topic was directed at me, and it was not supposed to be, I promise. But we've all encountered a member of the public. It's a little related to the first one, but it's also, we could think of it as kind of the opposite. So somebody that knows everything there is to know about the War of 1812, and maybe they're approaching you and trying to trip you up, or maybe they're just there to give you a lecture on everything they know. So maybe the opposite, maybe similar to the first one. But Jeff, how do we deal with somebody, a member of the public who is a know-it-all, who has all this information?
So this is a tricky thing. Anybody who's ever worked at a historical site, you've definitely come across this before. At Fort Erie, we would sometimes, especially for younger staff members, you'd find people, we used to say, oh, they're trying to hijack a tour, where every stop on the tour, this person now has their own spiel that they're going to get into, and it can become a tricky kind of scenario. The way that I've tried to deal with it personally is using conflict resolution tactics. And part of it is you have to empathize with this person to a certain extent. Maybe they are trying to trick you up. Maybe they're trying to trap you to get you that big like gotcha moment, or maybe they just don't have anybody to talk to about military history. And now they found another like-minded person, and they want to just jump everything on you that they've ever read about the War of 1812 because finally there's somebody there. So with the conflict resolution tactic that I like to use is I think that for all people, people want to be heard. People want to feel like they have a voice. They want to feel like their opinions and their thoughts and what they've read have value and have merit. So oftentimes, if I'm in that situation, I will then agree with the person. A lot of head nodding because now you're the shoes on the other foot almost. Do a lot of head nodding. Yep. Oh yeah, absolutely. When you get an opportunity to jump in there, repeat a little bit about what they said. So that way this person now feels validated. Like, oh yeah, when you were talking about, how the British cheered before they were supposed to at the Battle of Stony Creek, and that caused a little bit of confusion. That's a key part of the battle. So reiterate some of their points. Now this member of the public who might, regardless of their motives, now they feel, oh, this person's listening to me. They feel validated, and it can sometimes take that edge a little bit off. We don't generally like maybe sometimes we'll do camp tours that are provided by a reenactor. If things do get out of control, you can always say, okay, sorry, folks, we're getting a crunch for time. Let's move on to the next stop to sort of stop that kind of thing from happening. But if it's that interaction face to face, this is kind of where in the reenactment world, we have to be cognizant of our friends. So kind of like a buddy system. If I see Colin is in a conversation with a guy and it doesn't look like Colin's talked for 15 minutes and it's just been a one-way interaction, walk up and say, "Hey, Colin, we got this thing coming up." You can just make it up and say, "Sorry to interrupt everyone, but Colin and I have to go to this. We're going to do a
Another meeting.
battlefield walkthrough right now. We're going to have to go." So watch out for your buddies and save your buddies if they're in trouble. That's something we'd say at all the time at the fort. If you get pinned in a corner and there's no way out, it's sort of up to other people in your unit, people to come and try to rescue from those situations. So that's what I would say. And then also to just realize that yes, we're reenactors. Yes, we're representing our hobby. We're representing our units. Sometimes in a certain way, we're representing sites. But if you're ever in a conversation where you feel uncomfortable, you have no obligation to remain in that conversation, especially too if you're in these conversations, it's a know-it-all, and then all of a sudden the conversation swings to a topic like modern day politics, and now we're talking about the conservatives versus the liberals, and you don't want any part of that conversation. You can say, "Oh, sorry." You can stop that conversation, say, "Sorry, I've got somewhere I gotta be right now. Nice talking to you," and leave that conversation. There's no obligation for you to sit there and talk to a person all day, all night, especially if the topics become uncomfortable or you don't feel it's a positive interaction. So you can always just walk away.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Ewan's going to actually come back, and Colin's already brought this up a little bit. Ewan's going to come back to it in a second. Maybe I should have ordered these a little bit better, but we'll jump back to that in a second, Ewan. But Colin, for you, sorry, I know there's people in the chat, and I'm trying to keep an eye on the messages and not really doing a great job. I know somebody already. Gave a little hint of some of these tips and tricks. But Colin, maybe you can help us out here too. How do you know when you're talking to a member of the public and they've just completely checked out? They're done, they're not listening to you. So what are some maybe body language cues we're looking for, that sort of thing?
Yeah. So knowing, when someone's checked out or sort of is losing interest in the conversation's kind of petering out. Uh, it really comes down to kind of reading the room or the metaphorical room because we're usually outside. But also, as someone I think earlier mentioned, biggest thing is like watching for nonverbal cues. Body language, like if people are looking like they're sort of more rigid, like they're more uncomfortable, like they're shifting weight a lot, like they're kind of looking a little restless. If they're looking around a lot rather than actually looking at you while you're actually talking to them, that could be a pretty big indication that you're not having an overly engaged conversation anymore. The person's kind of checked out. Also listen to what they're saying or not saying. If there's sort of a general lack of inquiry or lack of follow-up to what you're saying, if they don't have much to say, if they don't have kind of further questions or comments or even just acknowledging of what you're saying, that's a pretty good indication that they're probably checked out or that certainly what you're talking about is not really resonating with them anymore. And also the biggest thing, and we've all been guilty of this because we're all passionate about this hit time period and about the history, but also just be aware of how long you've actually been talking to someone. Be aware of the time spans. We all know we're in the middle of an interesting conversation that we're certainly keen about. You can lose track of time, and it's good to sort of focus on quicker, shorter focuses with audiences, especially if audiences including like a family with young, restless children. Be aware of how long you've been talking. Also, just be aware of how you're talking. Be aware of sort of your voice control. Don't come off monotone. Don't come off overly rigid yourself. It's kind of a cliche, but use your hands. Act like be engaging and seem keen. Don't come off overly formal, because that can really be for myself. I know when I've talked to other people at sites I've been to, like when traveling, if an interpreter is very, very rigid or very, very formal, or God forbid is doing first person, it can kind of be really off-putting. So try and be casual, use your hands, be engaging, let the zip visitors, absorb information best when they're not just sort of passive listeners. and don't not listen to a lecture. But the biggest thing is just pick up on their verbal cues, their body language. And the biggest thing is if the conversation is becoming a one-sided conversation, it means they've probably checked out and it's ready to move on or wrap it up and give and wish them a good day.
Yeah, thanks, Colin. Lots of good pieces sort of tied in there. Thank you. Ewan, as promised, our last sort of problem here. Jeff kind of introduced it as maybe dealing with that know-it-all. So I'd call it politics and being politic. Not exactly the same thing, of course. I had this conversation with my grade 8 students this week on why politics is not just the plural of the word politic, but yeah, sort of two different ideas, Ewan, but a little open-ended there for you. Take it however you want.
Yeah, well, obviously, we need to address sensitive topics with Kale. When a conversation when conversation, should I say, turn to politics or sensitive issues, it's important to stay grounded in the historical context. Focus on how people at the time understood events, beliefs, and systems. While you should not excuse or minimize harm in the past, your role is to help visitors understand it clearly and accurately, rather than debate it, especially from a modern political standpoint. Uh, we got to acknowledge the complexity without taking sides. History is rarely simple, and different groups often experience the same events in very different ways. Even we reenact a conflict. We reenact the War of 1812, and we've probably all been in situations where, say, if you're an American and you're here in Canada and speaking to an audience that has a, shall we say, Canadian bias to our understanding of the conflict and its outcome, or you're a Canadian reenactor and you're south of the border and you're speaking to an American audience with the same kind of situation. We got to keep that kind of in mind. And even though we're talking about a conflict from 200 years ago, especially with sort of the current climate right now, we might inadvertently raise people's passions, right? So it's important to help visitors see multiple perspectives of a historical event or system or person, without positioning yourself as an advocate. And be honest about your scope. You won't have all the answers, and that's okay. This ties in with one of the big points Jeff was bringing up at the beginning. If a question goes beyond your knowledge or the focus of what you're talking about, it's appropriate to say so, and then guide the conversation back to what you can speak to with confidence. If a discussion becomes too focused on modern issues or personal issues or becomes heated, it's important to set respectful boundaries and, if possible, gently redirect. But as was getting at earlier, we have no obligation to keep up the conversation. So if we feel ourselves uncomfortable or we feel that the conversation is no longer productive, then you are well within your rights to end it. Obviously, there's a degree of diplomacy involved, but do not feel yourself trapped to continue to engage with an argumentative person. And this is where that kind of buddy system that was being talked about earlier by Jeff is very important. And so hopefully your fellow hobbyists might be aware that you're in a sort of a tense conversation, and they can maybe help you get out of that conversation if it comes to that. We have to keep the conversation constructive, inclusive, and rooted in your role as, for a better way of saying it, a historical interpreter. There's no need to go beyond that.
Thank you so much, Ewan. I know at least two different more formal interviews this year really tried to steer me towards, oh, you're reenacting a Canadian American conflict. Tell us the parallels between, and it's like, you know what? I can answer this question without being drawn in, right? And I can tell you about my friends in the US, and I can tell you about, how we want to continue to be friends, right, without being drawn in. So some of that stuff takes some practice, but if the message all along has been if you're not comfortable with it, you don't have to do it, right? So thank you so much. At this point, I'm going to wrap up, and I'm going to I've got sort of 3 points here to kind of wrap up, and then I'm going to open the floor for questions. So sort of three highlights for myself. Be friendly and welcoming. Please, that's right from the beginning with talking about Tom's story, right? Where maybe he didn't feel that somebody was particularly friendly and welcoming. That's a huge thing for us. Of course, read the room is the message we've had sort of from all three. Um, and then I would wrap up with whatever the conversation is. Please thank people for being there. They've traveled to come and see us. They've traveled to a site or maybe to, um, maybe a historic site like Fort George or Fort Erie, or maybe they're coming to someplace like Longwoods. But they've traveled to be there. They've probably paid money to be there, and they're there to try to learn in most cases. So, you know what? They stopped by and they just said hello to you, and then they kept moving because that's all they wanted to do. Still, thanks for coming by. I appreciate you being here, right? That's always really appreciated and helps them connect. Um, One other thing that I might just throw in before we get to questions is all three of these people are amazing. They have years and years and years of experience. So a huge thank you to them for donating their time. But I will say, I've been reenacting for 25 years. I've certainly not been considered myself a historical interpreter for 25 years. Uh, maybe more like 5 years. I've considered myself a historical interpreter at reenactments. Um, but I'm constantly learning. And so I think maybe Jeff brought up the idea of a mentor. There are incredible resources within our hobby, within our time period. We can always get better at this stuff. So please, if you beyond this talk, if you want to learn more, you thought this really scratched the surface, but I really want to keep digging. Um, these three are an amazing resource, and I know as well there's some of my American friends. There's some amazing resources in some of the groups down there as well. So please, please, please make use of these people. They're fantastic. At this point, I am going to stop sharing my screen so that I can, oh, look at all the people here. So that I can see all your lovely faces and say hello to everybody. Um, and then I'm going to open the floor to questions. As I said at the beginning, if you would like to put questions in the chat, I know that there's already a few there, so I'm going to start with those. But if you're willing to, please use the hand feature, put up your hand, and I will call on people and take questions, and then I will open up to kind of our three speakers to see if they are see which one wants to take the question. I'm scrolling back a little bit. Mike, I saw your question about feeding visitors at Canadian sites. I'm going to actually try to look into that a little bit more. I know, I think the regulations are different from a historic site perspective compared to a reenactor perspective, but maybe I'll just start and see if any of our three people know that answer. So the question is from Michael McComas. Are we allowed to feed visitors at Canadian sites when US sites prohibit it? Any ideas, Colin, Ewan, or Jeff?
I mean, for our main units perspective, professionally at the fort, we have a commercially inspected kitchen that supports our historic kitchen. I'm sure Fort George is the same way. So I know that food coming out of the historic space at the fort are okay. I'm actually less clear about what the rules are for like someone cooking over the fire. Actually, I don't know if there's any language in any of the waivers we signed, but I know that like when forts serve samples out of the kitchen, it's allowed because it's coming out of an inspected kitchen for public health. But our campfires, actually, that's a good point.
Yeah, so let's maybe Mike, a good idea would be to we'll take a look at that and see what we can dig up. Michael Rosen said, "What do we do about the public address announcer who always tells the public that to be caught napping is a reference to flint napping?" So sort of that same idea of we're catching people making mistakes. This is maybe this is somebody hired by the site though, or even Jeff, Colin, and you and we talked about correcting members of the public and fellow reenactors. But what about correcting if there are sort of professional interpreters at the site that we're hearing, or somebody paid by the site that we're hearing make mistakes? Does that change your answers a little bit? Anybody want to jump in on that?
Well, I think speaking as someone who works at Fort York National Historic Site, I value feedback from the public, and especially value feedback from people who help out with our events, such as yours. So, for example, if this was in reference to interpretation, an announcement that was happening for, say, a musket demonstration at Fort York, I what I would suggest is come to somebody like me or Colin, who works at the site, who you know, and let us know, hey, the guy who's narrating the demo, I don't really agree with what they were saying there. You've let us know, and then we can speak to our colleague and address the matter internally.
Yeah.
I think I know who we might be talking about in that comment. Truth be told, I don't think I've listened to a battle narration from beginning to end in a very, very long time. So getting that kind of feedback, if I was giving that narration, getting that kind of feedback would be very important for me, just speaking for myself. So I think that, like, there's an example where if you don't know the person personally and you feel uncomfortable going to them directly, there's many people in the hobby who knows the people who do these battle narrations. So again, feel free to come to somebody like Chris or Jeff or Colin or me or Tom, and we can always bring that up to whoever is brought on to help with the narration. Although they might be brought on by the site, we often have a long history and relationship with them, and we can easily engage with them in a conversation about any concerns or questions that were raised about their narration.
Yeah, thanks, Ewan. And that brings up a bigger point too, right? Is I did try to point out you and Jeff and Colin are always happy to help. If you want to really dig into interpretation more. But if I hope everybody now by now in Crown Forces North America knows that the staff is always there to help with whatever comes up. So if there is a case with a fellow reenactor, look, this is Jimmy from the 57th, and I don't really know him very well. Um, but I heard he was talking about spitting musket balls down the barrel. Well, yeah, that's your first your sergeant major. One of his roles is a first line of contact for the staff, right? So feel free to go. I mean, don't talk to me, but feel free to go talk to Jeff, right? That's what he's there for. Jonah, thanks for your question, Jonah. Jonah Ellens, for those of you that don't know him. I had a visitor from Europe. This is really interesting, actually. Ask about modern Canadian-US relations. I didn't sense that they were baiting me and seemed generally interested in how we saw the current situation. Is it professional to share some basic thoughts and perspectives on recent issues as a representative of the hobby? Thoughts on that one?
Well, uh, speaking only for myself, I engage with a lot of international visitors when I'm conducting tours at the fort, and so I get these kind of questions all the time. A lot of people kind of use the conversations that I have with them to learn about Canada, to learn about sort of our civics, how we govern ourselves, our thoughts about that. I also get a lot of international visitors coming to me with questions related to settler indigenous relations. As a City of Toronto employee, I have to be very conscious that I am representing the city in my job. But what I will do, depending on the audience, is kind of make it clear, speaking only for myself and not for the city. Here's my thoughts and feelings. I try to be very neutral. I try to present many sides, and I also try to provide resources, but occasionally I do feel compelled to engage with a visitor, but speaking only as you and the individual, not you and the City of Toronto employee.
Yeah, and I think it can, just depending on the situation, it can actually lend itself to more interesting conversations and drawing parallels. Because as we know, similar to what we're seeing today, there was not universal support for the war back then, even amongst the United States. We know there's very famous quotes from people like Locouture talking about the fact that it felt like an unnatural war, an unnatural conflict. And so there's also interesting parallels to talk about, like, the actions of people in political positions or in positions of power do not necessarily reflect the actual realities of the people on the ground. So there's also another opportunity there to carefully, talk about relating the parallels of the past with what we're doing, experiencing today, and that people back then, similar to people today, doing are not necessarily always in favor of what is happening across borders and internationally as well. So there's also some interesting parallels there when prompted with, but you have to kind of gauge what the people are looking for. If they're genuinely curious, versus if they're just trying to bait you or trying to get into debate. It's always a little careful, but there is sometimes interesting conversations and opportunities happen even with real world events we have right now.
Yeah, thanks, guys. So one thing that interestingly hasn't really come up very often, but I know all three of our speakers use it on a regular basis is sort of their sense of humor. And so I find myself, when somebody's trying to bring up politics, so what's your feeling on, the current political situation? Sometimes it's just, well, we live in interesting times, something that's going to kind of get maybe like a little chuckle out of them, but a little diffusion, right? So I know Jeff talked about sort of de-escalating strategies. I think one of my favorites is a sense of humor, and so even just feel free to use that as an escape clause is sort of my advice there too. Wanted to Ian Burns also. I will come back. Chris going and somebody else both brought up first person interpretation, which is a fascinating topic. So I'm gonna jump to that next. I'm not ignoring you just for a second. But Ian brought up the idea of what he calls the blurb. And I tried my best to use this at MTA last weekend. And so just so you have an idea of what I'm talking about, I would have um, when somebody came into our camp, right, our standard 10 foot rule or 5 foot rule, right, is we're greeting them, we're making eye contact. That's sort of the rule in the unit. But we would all have our own blurb. So I would say, welcome to the 42nd camp. Welcome to Paris. We're camped just outside Paris. It's 1815. We've just defeated Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo, and now we're settling in. I forget how exactly I worded it. I said something about how we're just keeping an eye on Paris to make sure Napoleon doesn't come back. So I had about a 15-second, 20-second just introduction to what people were seeing, so that then they have an idea. MTA is it's a timeline, so it's a little bit different. They're not really sure exactly what time period it is, that sort of thing. So just a little introduction to sort of welcome to the camp, give that little brief background, so we're not, you're not lecturing somebody, but you're giving them that tiny little bit of information. And then I'm turning to kind of what Ewan and Jeff and Colin are talking about, where we're trying to gauge their interest, right? So, if it's a little kid, I'm saying, hey, why don't you come and do you want to try playing the drum, which I noticed Paul mentioned is really popular, right? So I like this strategy of kind of a blur, just like kind of a welcome. Here's what we are, before you sort of jump into these other strategies as well. Now I'm wondering if all three of you would mind one at a time. I'll go you and Jeff Colin because that's the order you are on my screen. I'm wondering if you can give your opinion on first person interpretation. Somebody called it method acting, I think. But basically acting like my name is uh, Captain John Smith, and it is actually 1813 outside the Battle of Stony Creek. And sticking with that, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Ewan.
Yeah, well, speaking only for myself, I'm not a fan of it. I think if it's done in a performance style, like you have an audience and then you have a performers doing sort of a set production where they're not necessarily engaging directly with the audience, that's one thing. But I have seen too often first person interpretation just come off as very corny, best way I can maybe put it. I'll use an example, personal example. This is years ago, so maybe there's been a number of changes there. But over 20 years ago, I was at Colonial Williamsburg, and I needed an ATM. I needed to get some cash out, and I went to a staff person and said, "Hey, I'm looking for an ATM," and they decided to engage me, even though I was in uniform. I was there as part of an event, so I was in uniform. They were in a costume. But they decided to engage me as if they had no idea what I was talking about. And they were directing me to where the historical bank would be. It's like, no, buddy. I just need an ATM. Now, this guy might have been having at me. He might have been laughing on the inside. I don't know. But it sticks out in my mind. Like, here's somebody looking for help. I'm not asking any historical questions. And the guy was committed to the act. And to me, that was very frustrating. And in the end, he did help me, but it was like pulling teeth to try to get him to just point the right direction of where to go to find an ATM. So
Thanks, you and Jeff.
Yeah, so for me, as a history nerd, there's some parts of first person interpretation I can't get past, and that is simply I represent a sergeant major in the 49th Regiment. I know for a fact that the guy who was the sergeant major in the 49th Regiment was from Ireland. I don't have an Irish accent. I can't do an Irish accent. And there are also hundreds and hundreds of words that we no longer use or words that we do use that had very different meanings back then. So for me, when you're trying to do a first person interpretation, unless you have spent your whole life researching this stuff, it's almost impossible to have the diction and the language and the feel of a language that like none of us have actually heard. There's no audio recordings of War of 1812 veterans. So we don't know what's the common parlance. You can get the vulgar tongue and then try to incorporate some of that in. But the reality is when you spend a lot of time reading primary sources, letters, and stuff, you notice the language is very different. Words have very different meanings, and I think it's almost impossible for a modern person to accurately represent that. However, there are some instances, like Fort Erie, for example, does the candlelight tours, and people go through, and then the people on there, as Ewan said, it's like a performance. You're not interacting with the public. You walk by a surgery and there's the surgeon doing his thing. You go by the officers' quarters and the officers are doing their thing. And that is more of like a performance kind of thing. But I think that I don't know. I'm not personally a fan of it. And I think it can come off a little bit weird. And I don't think that any of us are going to be able to do the accents and the language justice enough to make it an accurate thing. That's just my 2 cents.
Thanks, Jeff. Colin, you're going to give us a completely different point of view.
Unfortunately, no. I agree with both you and Jeff. From my experience, first person is really only works when it is again it's sort of a more of a theatrical context that people are well aware of what they are about to see. I mean, we all have seen and some of us know some fantastic interpreters and first person interpreters places like Williamsburg, but from what I do, they generally do that in more of a theatrical setting that people know what they're getting into. I remember years ago I was at a site and I was walking into a space that I thought was just being a staff member. Then they started asking me about what I was wearing on my legs because I had shorts on. It was very off-putting. It was very like, no, I don't want to have this kind of conversation. It can be very off-putting for visitors. So I think, yeah, it works with the right context and with people who do have more of a theatrical background. But I also, I think many of us know plenty of historical interpreters who have theater and acting backgrounds who would agree that first person, for the most part, is not the best method to engage with people unless it is in more of a sort of acting tableau vignette sort of situation. The example Jeff gave with the candlelight tours does work because it is not directly engaging with the public. It is literally the acting part. But I think we can all agree that majority of the time in our hobby, that is not where most of the interactions are set up to do. And so I think for the most part, first person is not the best. I think there's a reason why a lot of sites are getting away from it. And from my own interactions, both as a member of the hobby and also as a visitor to plenty of other historic sites, I think it's not what most people expect or are wishing to see when they go to one of these sites. They want to just talk to someone as an equal, but with their own experiences rather than putting on a facade or feel like this isn't actually a genuine conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope I'm not, you and I'll come back to you in a second. I hope I'm not going to steal your thunder here. But I know all three of our panel here, members of our panel here, have talked about the importance of kind of engaging and creating that relationship. And I think in a lot of ways, being on the other side of that, I have seen that trying to interact with a first person interpreter, it really shuts down that dialogue, right? Because most members of the public, as we said, sometimes they're already intimidated by you just by being in uniform. I mean, I naturally intimidate people. I'm tall and I carry a big sword. But if you're interacting with them like it's 1812, now they don't know what to say to you, right? And you've really, in a lot of ways, closed off that conversation, and you've kind of eliminated all those things that we've been talking about today that you're really trying to do. Ewan.
I saw a question, a follow-up question, which we maybe get to in more in a moment. But I will occasionally get asked by the news agencies to answer their questions and engage in them as if I'm first person. And I just as a fun little anecdote, I generally have fun with that because I try to be the sort of fish out of water. Wait, you guys have universal plumbing? You guys have been to the moon in the sky? Like, I have to admit I have a bit of fun with that. But I see that there's a question about like what happens if a guest wants to engage you in first person. To kind of tie in with what Tom says in the comments, I just make it very clear. Look, I'm Ewan from Oakville. I'm not an actual sergeant major. I'm not a British soldier, and I really try to emphasize it's just me, and I can help in answering the questions about the past, about what I'm wearing, about what I'm about to eat. But generally speaking, I try to avoid performance for the reasons that have been mentioned.
So I'm just scrolling through to see if I've missed any questions. But again, somebody pointed out if you go to the React button at the bottom of your screen, that you should be able to find the hands up button there. But in the meantime, I'm just Joanne and Beth, by the way, both Joanne Laflamme and Beth Goldsworthy. I guess not everybody knows everybody on this call, so I should be a little clear. They're both pointing out that handing out food does come with some very difficult. It raises a lot of issues, so you really want to be very careful with that. And they're offering some strategies for how to avoid that. Which Colin pointed out when you're at the fort, right? It's food inspected, right? It's food grade, right? All these things. You have no idea, right? The worst thing we want to do is have somebody come back to us and say, well, I got sick because somebody let me try um, their hardtack, or nobody told me that this had some type of seed or spice in it, right? And I had an allergic reaction. So
And they're going to
it's
go back
probably
not
just sorry.
No, I was going to say they're going to go back not to you because you're going to be going home at the end of Sunday. They're going to go to the site and say, "Hey, I got food
Absolutely. Yeah.
poisoning at Fort
Yeah.
Erie."
Yeah. Yeah. And that's going to look great as a headline, right? So um, I'm just going to fill some time for a minute or two, see if there's any questions, anything that came up while we were thinking. I do have to point out that for all, I mean, I think we're all somewhat united here in being very wary of first person interpretation. But as Colin pointed out, when it's done well, it can be brilliant. And I think lots of us on this panel know Mark Schneider and know he's probably one of the best historical interpreters, certainly that I've seen. So, yes, it can be done very well, but he's also dedicated his life basically to that, right? And learning that and figuring that out. So, um, Jeff Kimber has a question. Go ahead, Jeff. You're live on the air.
No question. But also back to the first person interpretation, because I think there's new. It's not just like, oh, I'm first person or I'm not first person. There's nuance of it to it. Because for me, when we all do it, like when we go on parade, for example, when I'm shouting and screaming as a sergeant major. I'm not angry or really being a sergeant major, but that also becomes a bit of a first person kind of interpretation for the public. And same thing on the battlefield when you're there, especially if you're within earshot of the crowd, you're yelling and screaming. And part of that is fun for the reenactors. You're kind of getting the experience, but then it's also fun for the crowd. So at Fort Erie, I screamed a lot at the when people were falling in. I think the crowd likes that. I think reenactors kind of like that. So there is a part of it that is sort of first person when you're taking on the role of a sergeant or an officer and you're interacting with the troops. It is sort of like that, but I'm not going to then fall off parade and put on a terrible, terrible Irish brogue and pretend that I'm, Francis Brew from 1814. So it's a nuance thing.
Yeah, really nice point. Heidi asks a question, which I got to be honest, Heidi, I think this is a massive question. Is there a list of best places to refresh ourselves on the history before events, websites or books that you recommend? Um, so if you're looking, yeah, wow. I'm not really sure where to start. I would maybe we can start with all three of you, your favorite general War of 1812, so sort of overview of the war books if you've got a favorite. Let's start there.
I don't mind the Incredible War of 1812. What's the author's name?
Hitsman.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
Hitsman. That's a pretty good, it's not very long. It's a pretty good overview of the War of 1812 that you can get a sense. And then you can also, for me, you don't need to read the whole thing. If you're going to Fort Erie, read the Fort Erie chapter. Like, you know what I mean? Like find those little sections, read maybe about that campaign to put it within context. But for me, that's my favorite overall War of 1812 history book that sort of brings it all together, and it's not very big.
Thank you. Can I point out that it's J. Mackay Hitsman, not just Hitsman? Thank you. Colin, you pull the books off your shelf now?
Uh, yeah, I mean, I was going to agree with Jeff that Hitsman, I think, is for overall, when we get visitors coming to the fort, the gift shop, I was like, I just want to read out like one book about the War of 1812 that isn't about one specific campaign. I think the Hitsman one is one that we often point out. It's too bad that Robin Bress is not, the publisher is not in business anymore. But really, all those Robin Brass studio books are pretty good at capturing sort of all the various campaigns. They're pretty quick to look through. As we know, there's a lot of repetitions, not repetition, but there's a lot of overlapping chapters in some. And if you want to just refresh yourself on the nuances of, the Fort George, Niagara 1813 campaign, you can kind of just go to those pertinent chapters, which I would often do before, Stony Creek or Fort George. So those are obviously good books. Um, for in terms of some of the newer publications, I'm sure you would agree there's a lot of stuff coming out of Helion now, out of the UK, which is a lot more updated research, a lot more nuanced stuff, and it's some good emerging sort of maybe what we consider sort of amateur historians coming in. They're the guys who did fashion regulation, and you can't see that, they're a good publisher. One of my go-to favorites for really sort of the nuts and bolts, a lot of really specific facts, but do help to layer in um, to sort of your overall hobby is this one, the Napoleon's facts, and you can't see it, but British Army against Napoleon, which by Burnham and McGigan, and forward by Rory Muir. It's really good. It breaks down all the specifics and costs and everything. It really helps to kind of put it in perspective. Little facts which people might often want to reference. But
Yeah,
Ewan's a book.
a couple people have mentioned Don Hickey books. Don Hickey is fantastic historian. Um, and then nobody's mentioned yet the Donald Graves. So I get it, right? If you're going to Chrysler's Farm, you don't want to read the entire an entire book on just um, the Battle of Chrysler's Farm, but it is. I mean, I would be remiss if I didn't mention Don Graves. Ewan?
Yeah, well, Hickey, Don't Give Up the Ship, the book on that covers sort of the myths of the War of 1812. It's great how it's formatted, because you can really hyper-focus into not only particular subjects and campaigns and even historical individuals from the conflict, but also address some of the well-known myths and legends associated around them. So that is one of my go-to books that I recommend the public. And another person that I've always enjoyed his writing, and someone I will recommend to people who want to know about the War of 1812, is Alan Taylor's books. So you got the Civil War of 1812, which I think probably everyone on this call knows about. But for those who want to know more about the campaign in the Chesapeake, I highly recommend The Internal Enemy, Slavery and War in Virginia, 1772 to 1832, also by Alan Taylor. I find he's such an easy author to get into, and I personally like his writing style. And so, as someone who knows a lot about the War of 1812, I get tremendous value reading his stuff, and also I think he's a great introduction to someone coming to the conflict for the first time.
Right. Just to add on to that, both of those authors, also you can find those books on Audible as audiobooks. So I'll be honest, since I've had young kids, I do not have a lot of time to read books like I used to. So if you're doing a long drive, and when you live in Ottawa, all reenactments are a long drive, you can throw one of those books on and be really zanged up by the time you actually get to an event. So just for those of you who are into a good old-fashioned audiobook.
Thanks, Jeff. And maybe Paul, I'm not sure the chat moved on. I've made a list of sort of all the authors that have mentioned here. So we will, when we post the video, we can add all those authors and their names. Colin, the Rory Muir book, what was the name of the title of that? Sorry, I slipped my mind.
The British Army against Napoleon, facts, lists, and trivia, 1805 to 1815.
Thank you. I don't think I have that one.
Uh-oh. Sorry, Shayna.
All
Obviously,
right.
I'll be remiss to write Ospreys for a quick read. You can easily throw in a bag to an event. Ospreys have their place. Obviously, they don't get too deep, but we all have a soft spot for Ospreys, I'm pretty sure. And for a quick little reference guide, some of their campaigns, even just Carl Benn's quick overview of the War of 1812, if you want a little quick little pocket guide, is a good little one to pick up. It isn't too expensive. It doesn't take too much room on all of our already overcrowded bookshelves.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's who wrote the Niagara campaign, the Osprey book? I can't remember now, but it's like you're saying, Colin, a good little quick refresher.
he was the English historian who passed away during the bicentennial.
Jon Latimer.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was going to say, Carl Benn's Osprey book has recently been re-released and re-edited. It's if you have his formal Osprey book on the War of 1812, get the new one as well. It's almost like reading a completely different book. Honestly, he's done a lot to update the information with latest scholarship, and as Colin's saying, it's very portable. I was going to say too, in regards to creating a list, maybe this is something that we as Crown Forces could do on the website, is have a recommended reading list. It's something I get asked to do all the time with work. And specifically, one of the things, as Colin knows, that I try to do with work is have a recommended reading list when it comes to Indigenous subjects, because this is something that is not as familiar with everyone. And these are questions that at least I get a lot of. And so trying to be up on the latest scholarship when it comes to subjects related to Canada's First Peoples, or the First Peoples in Canada, is very important. So.
Fascinating. Thank you. So James, I just clicked on that link and it's thank you for sending that. It's interesting that it's America's Battlefield Trust and almost none of the authors that we've mentioned are on there. So it gives you an extended list there as well. So thank you. So I'm going to we our timing was supposed to be 1 to 3 this afternoon. So we are rapidly running up against 3 o'clock, and I know it's we all have school and work and real life hitting us in the face tomorrow. So I will put out one last call for other questions. But while we're doing that, I just want to say again, thank you to everybody that joined us. I hope this was helpful to you. I hope you learned, you got some ideas, and I hope that um, you're really interested in trying to do these things. And of course, just like anything, like we say at NCO school or that sort of thing, um, we would love you to take these things back to your group. But if you want any help with that, if you say, yeah, actually, this is fantastic. I think, the Provincial Marine's really going to love hearing about this. But hey, Jeff or Colin, do you mind jumping on a call while I try to lead some training? Please just ask. We would love to help expand this even further. And of course, it would be remiss without thanking everybody on our panel. You and Jeff and Colin have, as you can see, they have a huge wealth of knowledge. This is really their strength, but also their um, they're one of their loves, right? They love sharing this. They love doing this at events, and it really comes across when you see them. I've been fortunate enough to be on tours led by all three of these guys, and it's really worth doing if you ever get a chance. So thank you so much to the three on the panel. Thank you all for joining us. And I will sign off and say I hope you all have a good rest of your weekend. Thank you so much for joining us.